Hi and Assalamualaikum. We are from Group 6. We are going to present Chapter 8, which is a memory. So first, what is memory? Memory is a mental process that stores, learn information and retrieve it as a response when needed in a certain situation. According to Werner 1918, memory is a way of storing meaningful information as an experience for future. Without memory, we cannot evaluate ourselves because self-understanding depends on the continuous awareness that can occur through the existence of memory. For example, in terms of teaching and learning, memory can help students retain what they have learned and apply it in a future situation. For teachers, memory allows them to plan lessons based on what students have already learned. Next, we have information processing model. There are three parts in this information processing model, which is processing, storing, and retrieving. So, I have one question. We as a human being, how we think? So, the use of computer system said to be an analogy how the way human think. However, human thinking is a very complex and more complex compared to the computer. Next, everyone in this world have a brain. There are a few components inside the brain. Firstly, motor cortex. The motor cortex help in the storage and executions of procedure memory, which are memory of how to perform tasks like riding a bike or typing. They are usually unconscious and automatic once learned. Secondly, frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is responsible for higher cognitive function, including reasoning, planning, problem solving, and aspect of speech and movement. It also stores semantic memories, which is fact and general knowledge, and episodic memory, which is personal experience and event. Next, we have prefrontal cortex, which is involved in executive functions such as decision making, attention, and self-control. It also manages short-term memory, which is use of temporary storage and manipulations of information. Next is temporal lobe. The temporal lobe contributes to auditory processing and language comprehension. It also a major role in formation and storage of long-term semantic and episodic memories, and also process new information for short-term memory. Besides that, we have hippocampus to convert short-term memory into long-term memory, especially semantic and episodic memories. It is involved when learning something new and when to recall specific event. Other than that, we also have amygdala that are involved in emotional processing and help to attach emotion to memories. It is important, especially for emotional memories like fears, happiness, and trauma. Last but not least, we have cerebellum. Cerebellum are coordinate voluntary movement and also play a key role in storing procedure memories. It also helps in motor learning, such as developing coordination and precision in tasks.
Hi, my name is Aglis and my metric number is 2AA351. Today I will be presenting about the three main process of memories: encoding, storage and retrieval. Let's begin with the first process, encoding. This is the process of receiving and converting information into a form that our brain can be understand and store. For an example, when you're listening to a lecture, your brain converts the sound of the lecturer's voice into a meaningful ideas. Next is storage. This is refer to how the brain retain information over time, like saving a file on your computer. For an example, after you studying a vocabulary words for a test, the information is stored in your long-term memory. Later, even days or weeks after studying, the information remain in your brain. That's how storage works. The final process is retrieval. This is when we access stored information and use it when we need it. For an example, imagine you are taking an exam and suddenly remember the definition of the term you studied last week. That's retrieval. Now let's look at one of the most influential theories related to the memory, the information processing theory. This theory was developed by Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin in 1968. According to this theory, the human mind works like a computer when it processes information. Just like a computer receives, store, and retrieves data, our brain also goes through the similar step. The theory proposed that are three different memory systems involved in processing information. First, sensory memory, second, short-term memory, third, long-term memory. First, we have sensory memory. This system briefly hold the information we get from our sense, what we see, hear, or touch, for just a few seconds. For example, imagine a sparkler being waved in the dark. You can briefly see a trail of light, even though it's no longer there. That's your sensory memory at work. Second, short-term memory. It holds information temporarily, usually about 15 to 30 seconds, and can handle it about 5 to 9 items at a time. When you look up a phone number and keep it in your head just long enough to dial it, that's your short-term memory helping you. And finally, long-term memory. This is where information is stored more permanently, often for a lifetime. For an example, you might remember your home address, your best friend names, or how to ride a bicycle. All of that is stored in your long-term memory. Now let's go deeper into the information processing model. This theory explains how the human brain works like a computer, receiving, storing, and retrieving information. Information processing refers to the mental activity involved in receiving information, store it, and retrieving it when needed. Let's break this process down. First, information is received through our sense. This is the input stage. Next, the process and store in memory system like short-term or long-term memory. Later, when we need it, the brain performs a function called retrieval where the stored information is organized and recorded. For an example, receiving information. When you see a new word while reading, your eyes and the visual input into your brain store information. If you repeat the word and try to understand it, it moves to the short-term memory. And retrieving information. During a test, you try to remember the word. If your brain retrieve it correctly, that's a successful memory retrieval. Okay, now I will explain how we process and store information using the three-stage model. Sensory memory. When we receive input like a sound or image, it enters sensory memory for a brief moment. If we don't pay attention, it's forgotten. Short-term memory. If we do pay attention, the information moves to a short-term memory where it stay for a short time. Repeating or rehearsal help it keep it longer. Third, long-term memory. With enough rehearsal, we encode the information into long-term memory where it can stay for a long time. We can retrieve it when later we need it. Information can be lost at any stage if not processed properly. For an example, you see a phone number as an input, pay attention, it go to the short-term memory and repeat it, rehearsal, store it in long-term memory and recall it to make a call.
There is two type of memories. First, explicit memory and also implicit memory. For explicit memory, which is also known as declarative memory, the definition is memory we can consciously recall and talk about, and it usually used for facts and also events. Within the explicit memory, there is two type of memory, which is episodic memory and also semantic memory. For episodic memory, is a memory of personal experiences or events. For example, remembering your last birthday party. And then the second one is semantic memory, which is a memory of facts and general knowledge. For example, knowing that Paris is the capital of France. For implicit memory, also known as non-declarative memory, the definition is memory that happens unconsciously, like skills and also habits. There's three types of implicit memory. First, procedural memory. Second, classical conditioning, and also primary. So for procedural memory, it is a memory of how to do things. For example, riding a bike or typing on the keyboard. That's for procedural memory. For priming, is like when exposure to something influences behavior later, without awareness. For example, seeing the word yellow makes you think of banana faster. And then the same thing goes as when you say red, you recall about apple so fast. And then the last one is classical conditioning, like learning through association. For example, you will feeling hungry when you hear the lunch bell. Next is the stages of information processing. So there's three stages. Okay, so first of all is sensory memory, where it takes in information from the senses, like what we see, what we hear, and what we feel. And it can last for a very short time, like less than a second. And then, for example, like seeing a flash of light. And then the second one for short-term memory, also called as working memory, holds small amounts of information for a short time, about 15 to 30 seconds. Can store about 5 to 9 times 9 items at once. For example, like remembering a phone number just long enough to dial it. And the last one is long-term memory, where it stores information for a long time, even for life. It has a large capacity, and information here can be about facts, experiences, or skills. For example, remembering your first day of school.
Hi everyone, my name is Nazira binti Azmi and my metric number is 295396. Today I'm going to share the definition of forgetfulness. So forgetfulness is the inability to recall information that was stored in memory. According to Ebbinghaus' forgetting curve, people tend to forget over 70% of newly learned information within 2 days, especially if the information is not meaningful or not reviewed. For example, after attending a lecture, you might forget most of the content unless you review it soon after. So let's move on to the cause of forgetfulness. The first one is interference. So there are two types, which is proactive interference. It's old information that blocks new information. For example, you keep entering your old phone password instead of your new one. The second type of interference is retroactive. The definition is the new information that blocks old information. For example, after learning a new address, you forget your previous one. Next one is repression and suppression. It is a painful or embarrassing memories are pushed out of awareness. For example, a person who experienced trauma may not remember the event clearly as a defense mechanism. The next one we have is encoding failure. It is information that was never properly stored in memory. For an example, you met someone at a party, but because you were distracted, you cannot remember their name later. So now I'm going to share the other cause of forgetfulness, which is amnesia. Amnesia is a memory loss caused by brain injury or illness. For example, after a car accident, someone may not remember what happened before the crash. So the last cause is decay. Decay is a memory fades over time when not used. For example, forgetting how to speak a language you learned in school but haven't practiced in years.
Memory encoding is the crucial process through which sensory input is transformed into storable memory traces, determining how information progresses through our memory systems from sensory memory to short term memory (STM) and ultimately to long term memory (LTM). During this process, the brain converts raw sensory data into processable neural codes through a selective mechanism that prioritizes meaningful information for deeper encoding. This conversion occurs through three primary types of encoding, which is visual encoding for images and visual patterns, acoustic encoding for sounds and verbal information, and semantic encoding for meaningful concepts and ideas, with semantic encoding being particularly effective for long term retention. The efficiency of encoding depends on several key factors, including the individual's level of attention to the information, its emotional significance or relevance, the depth of cognitive processing involved, and the use of elaborative rehearsal techniques that connect new information to existing knowledge structures. Together, these processes determine what information we retain and how effectively we can retrieve it later. The Atkinson-Shiffrin model outlines memory as a three-stage system. Sensory memory serves as the initial stage, briefly holding large amounts of raw sensory information in its original, unprocessed form for a very short duration, with separate stores in for different senses like vision and hearing. Information that receives attention then moves to short-term memory (STM), which acts as a temporary workspace with limited capacity and lasts about 18 to 30 seconds without rehearsal, primarily using acoustic encoding. Through processes like rehearsal and chunking, important information can be transferred to long-term memory (LTM), which has essentially unlimited capacity and can store information permanently from minutes to a lifetime, organized hierarchically through schemas and primarily using semantic encoding for meaningful storage and retrieval. This model demonstrates how information flows through different memory systems and from initial sensory input to potentially permanent storage. Sensory memory briefly retains raw sensory information in its original form, acting as the first stage of memory processing. It holds visual stimuli for about 0.25 seconds, auditory input for 2 to 4 seconds, and tactile sensation for approximately 2 seconds, while other senses like smell and taste also have brief sensory stores. This automatic high capacity system preserves detailed sensory data just long enough for the brain to determine what's important enough to transfer to short term memory, creating continuity in perception while filtering out irrelevant stimuli like why we see smooth motion rather than disjointed frames, or can briefly rehear words after they are spoken. Without this temporary sensory buffer, our experience of the world would be fragmented and overwhelming.
So, hi everyone, my name is Muhammad Maher. My metric number is 291565. So, now I'll be presenting the section on memory retrieval, which is one of the most important processes in our memory system. So, memory retrieval refers to the ability to access and bring back information that we have previously learned and stored in our brain. It is the third stage in memory process after encoding, where we take the information and store it where the information kept in the brain. So, without retrieval, we wouldn't be able to apply what we know. For example, imagine learning how to ride a bicycle as a child, but not being able to do it now simply because you can't retrieve the memory. So memory retrieval plays a major role in learning academic performance, problem solving, and daily decision making. So the first type of retrieval is called a recall. Recall is when we retrieve information without any help or hints. This means we have to actively pull the memory from our brain without seeing it or hearing it again. It requires a strong connection to that memory. For example, when you're writing an essay in an exam, you need to remember a theory or definition without any option or prompts. That's recall. You are depending purely on your memory strength. This form of retrieval considered more difficult because it depends on how deeply we encoded the information layer. If we memorize it briefly without understanding it, recalling becomes harder. However, if we learn it through repetition or by connecting it to meaningful things, our chances of recalling it successfully improve. So the second type of memory retrieval is recognition. Recognition involves identifying or selecting the correct information when you see it again. It's usually easier than recall because the information is already there in front of us, and we just need to recognize what's familiar. A common example is when you answer a multiple choice question. You may not be able to recall the answer on your own, but when you see it listed, you can recognize it. You can recognize it. Another example is seeing someone's face and remembering that you have met them before. However, recognition can sometimes be tricky. We might select the wrong option just because it feels familiar. This can lead to what's known as false memory, where we believe we remember something that didn't actually happen. So the third type of retrieval is called relearning. So relearning is when we study something again that we had previously learned but forgotten. What's interesting is that the second time we learn it, we are usually able to do it faster. This shows that the original memory is still there, even if we don't remember it clearly. Let's say you learn a poem in a primary school and you forgot it over time, but when you see the lines again and try to memorize it, you pick it up very quickly. That's relearning. Your brain is recognizing the pattern and it's easier to remember it again. So this type of retrieval proof that our brain hold onto more information than we realize. Even when we think we have forgotten something, there are still memory traces that can be reactivated. Now let's look at how memory retrieval is useful in real life and how we can strengthen it. So application of retrieval, we use it retrieval every day, especially in exams where we need to recall definitions or formulas. So during job interviews when we must remember our experiences, and even in everyday situations like remembering to attend appointments or how to cook a dish. So how do we improve retrieval? Here are a few effective strategies. First one is visual imagery. These are memory aids like acronyms or pictures. For example, to remember the colors of the rainbow, people use the acronym right ROYGBIV. So visualizing information make it easier for the brain to recall it later. Second one is repetition and rehearsal. Repeating information helps strengthen memory connections. Whether you are reading, writing, saying it out loud, repetition makes the memory more stable in your brain. The third one is connect information with meaningful associations. When you relate new information to something personal or something you already know, it becomes more memorable. For instance, connecting a psychology theory into a real life example helps you understand it and remember it better. The last one is create contextual cues. The environment or mood where you study can help trigger memory. If you study in a quiet place and take the exam in a similar setting, your brain is more likely to recall the information. This is called context independent memory. So by using these strategies, we can boost our memory retrieval and perform better academically and in a daily life.
Hi everyone, I'm from the group 6 and my metric number is 269421 and my name is Zhang Shuja and I will do a simple introduction to help you guys about series that relate to the focal functions. And the first series is a decade series. This series states that if a memory is never repeated, it will fade over time, and the informations stories in the memories leave the traces, and it is not recorded for a long time in the conscious field. These traces will be destroyed or disappeared. And for examples, you memorize English words today, but you didn't write it down or use it again. After 3 hours or days, you may have completed, forgotten it. That was be a decay series. And how to prevent the decay? You can review what you have learned and to keep it in mind and try to apply the knowledge to real life. So I will continue with the second series. It's the interference series. This series says that the information in our long-term memory is still here, but the different memories can miss and make it hard to remember clearly. There have the two main types of the interference. The first one is the proactive interference. That would be the old informations interferes with learning new information. And for examples, you used to pack your car in the sport A every day, but from this week you pack your car in the sport B, but every day you still walk to the sport A firstly because your old memories is interferes with your new memories. And the second one is the retroactive interference. That would be the new information interferes with the remembering older information. For examples, you started with chapter 1 yesterday, but today you started the chapter 2, and now when your teachers ask some question about the chapter 1, you mix it up with the chapter 2. That's because the new memories is interfering with the old ones.
Motivated forgetting, or called repression theory, by definition, is a defense mechanism where the mind actively suppresses painful or unpleasant memories. These memories are not lost but pushed out of consciousness in order to protect emotional well-being. So basically, the information is still stored but not easily retrievable. Cause of forgetting is on the branches of we call engram, memory information that alter brain structure. This disrupt by a physical damage or interference with the structure can impair memory. As a result, forgetting occurs due to loss or damage of these engrams. Next, we talk about amnesia. A clinical view on amnesia, by definition, is a memory disorder caused by brain damage, disease, or trauma. The symptom is loss of facts, experience, and learned information, and difficulty forming new memories. Types of amnesia, there are two: retrograde and anti-retrograde. Retrograde amnesia, one cannot recall past event or information prior to the incident, while the anti-retrograde cannot form new memories after the incident, may be temporary or permanent depending on the severity. Lastly, on dementia vs Alzheimer. By definition, dementia is a brain-related disorder caused by various diseases or injury. Its symptoms can be memory loss, difficulty with attention, judgment, reasoning, and visual perception. The age usually common after age 65, but can vary on underlying cause, which caused by multiple causes like stroke, Alzheimer, thyroid issue, vitamin deficiency, brain injury. The duration might be a progressive and permanent. Damage varies by cause and may stabilize. In relation to amnesia, may involve both anterograde and retrograde memory loss depending on the brain region affected, while Alzheimer is a specific and more common form of dementia. In early stage, there will be a difficulty learning new info, and later symptoms will be confusion, mood change, and disorientation. The age usually after 65, but early onset can occur in the 30s. The cause is still unknown, but it widely attributed to the amyloid cascade hypothesis. The duration is about gradually progression over 8 to 20 years. In relation to amnesia, it includes both types of amnesia as the disease progress. For the topic conclusion, memory is how we store and recall information. It's a key learning to daily life. It works through three main steps: encoding, storage, and retrieval. We have three types of memory: sensory, short-term, and long-term. Forgetting happens due to reasons like distraction, time, or brain damage. Disorders like amnesia and dementia shows how memories can be affected. We can improve memory using techniques like repetition, organization, and healthy brain habits. That's all from us. Thank you.
Now I will be talking about one of the most famous case study in the history of memory research, which is Hitam or Henry Molaison. After epilepsy surgery, he developed integrate amnesia. He couldn't form a new explicit memories, but his procedural memories stay intact. This case was crucial in showing that different brain systems control different types of memories. The next slide will be the illustration of this case.
On September 1st, 1953, William Scoville used a hand crank and a cheap drill saw to bore into a young man's skull, cutting away vital pieces of his brain and sucking them out through a metal tube. But this wasn't a scene from a horror film or a gruesome police report. Dr. Scoville was one of the most renowned neurosurgeons of his time, and the young man was Henry Molaison, the famous patient known as HM, whose case provided amazing insights into how our brains work. As a boy, Henry had cracked his skull in an accident and soon began having seizures, blacking out, and losing control of bodily functions. After enduring years of frequent episodes and even dropping out of high school, the desperate young man had turned to Dr. Scoville, a daredevil known for risky surgeries. Partial lobotomies had been used for decades to treat mental patients, based on the notion that mental functions were strictly localized to corresponding brain areas. Having successfully used them to reduce seizures in psychotics, Scoville decided to remove HM's hippocampus, a part of the limbic system that was associated with emotion, but whose function was unknown. At first glance, the operation had succeeded. HM's seizures virtually disappeared, with no change in personality, and his IQ even improved. But there was one problem. His memory was shot. Besides losing most of his memories from the previous decade, HM was unable to form new ones, forgetting what day it was, repeating comments, and even eating multiple meals in a row. When Scoville informed another expert, Wilder Penfield, of the results, he sent a PhD student named Brenda Milner to study HM at his parents' home, where he now spent his days doing odd chores and watching classic movies for the first time, over and over. What she discovered through a series of tests and interviews didn't just contribute greatly to the study of memory, it redefined what memory even meant. One of Milner's findings shed light on the obvious fact that although HM couldn't form new memories, he still retained information long enough from moment to moment to finish a sentence or find the bathroom. When Milner gave him a random number, he managed to remember it for 15 minutes by repeating it to himself constantly. But only 5 minutes later, he forgot the test had even taken place. Neuroscientists had thought of memory as monolithic, all of it essentially the same, and stored throughout the brain. Milner's results were not only the first clue for the now familiar distinction between short-term and long-term memory, but showed that each uses different brain regions. We now know that memory formation involves several steps. After immediate sensory data is temporarily transcribed by neurons in the cortex, it travels to the hippocampus, where special proteins work to strengthen the cortical synaptic connections. If the experience was strong enough or we recall it periodically in the first few days, the hippocampus then transfers the memory back to the cortex for permanent storage. HM's mind could form the initial impressions, but without a hippocampus to perform this memory consolidation, they eroded like messages scrawled in sand. But this was not the only memory distinction Milner found. In a now famous experiment, she asked HM to trace a third star in the narrow space between the outlines of two concentric ones, while he could only see his paper and pencil through a mirror. Like anyone else performing such an awkward task for the first time, he did horribly. But surprisingly, he improved over repeated trials, even though he had no memory of previous attempts. His unconscious motor centers remembered what the conscious mind had forgotten. What Milner had discovered was that the declarative memory of names, dates, and facts is different from the procedural memory of riding a bicycle or signing your name. And we now know that procedural memory relies more on the basal ganglia and cerebellum, structures that were intact in HM's brain. This distinction between knowing that and knowing how has underpinned all memory research since. HM died at the age of 82 after a mostly peaceful life in a nursing home. Over the years, he had been examined by more than 100 neuroscientists, making his the most studied mind in history. Upon his death, his brain was preserved and scanned before being cut into over 2,000 individual slices and photographed to form a digital map down to the level of individual neurons, all in a live broadcast watched by 400,000 people. Though HM spent most of his life forgetting things, he and his contributions to our understanding of memory will be remembered for generations to come.